Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, over the past few days, we had the attack on Sevastopol by Ukraine, the use of long-distance cruise missiles that had been provided by the UK. I think it's what they call the Storm Shadow missiles. And now we're told that the United States will also be providing long-range missiles, the ATACMS missiles. So what's kind of striking about all of this is that the US, the UK, France have now completely crossed all Russian red lines. The red lines that they had vowed not to cross, with namely giving Ukraine the ability to hit targets inside Russia. They've steadily upped the ante, saying, well, we're not going to do that, we're not going to do this, we're not going to provide this missile, we're not going to provide the M1 Abrams tanks or whatever. But then they've gone ahead and just done it anyway. So that raises a lot of questions because, of course, given that it's obvious what Ukraine is going to do with long-range missiles, then essentially the NATO powers are themselves responsible for missile attacks on Russian territory. And this is a question that was put to Secretary of State Blinken, is that, well, what about that? I mean, is the United States then happy with the missile attacks on Russian territory? So, well, we don't tell Ukraine what to target. Well, that's, of course, not true. And even if it were true, you could still
the Ukrainians cannot target without American help.
Exactly. That's exactly right. They can't do it without American help. So essentially, the US, UK, France are signing off on attacks on Russian territory. Now, that's really very problematic because then how long can Russia put up with this? Because this is essentially, humiliating to have the NATO powers think that they can just attack Russian territory at will and Russia doesn't retaliate. Because this is a little different from proxy wars in the past, because, okay, the Soviet Union provided North Vietnam with missiles and so on, and then they with those missiles they attacked U.S. forces, but that was in Vietnam. They didn't attack a U.S. territory. The Soviet Union wouldn't have provided North Vietnam with a weaponry that they can use on U.S. soil. Same with Afghanistan when the Soviets were there during the 1980s. Yeah, the Americans provided Stinger anti-aircraft guns to the Mujahideen. Yeah, then they shot Soviet aircraft and Soviet helicopters in Afghanistan. There was never any question that you go and shoot at anything on Russian territory. So NATO's now crossed this line, and you have to then wonder, well, what happens then? I mean, how long can Russia allow itself to be attacked in this way? And then, of course, if it doesn't, and then decides to take action, what kind of action and what might the consequences be? So, what's your take, Peter?
It teed it up really well. I think they're going to have to obviously react to this, and this is going up the escalation ladder, so Russia will have to follow. What does that mean? Well, I said a long time ago that Article 5 is going to be tested before this is all done. And we'll see what the reaction is, all for one and one for all. We'll see if that's actually true, okay? I don't think so, right. But I don't want to, I don't want to see it tested, right. But I think that that's inevitable right now, right. Okay? These long-range missiles, yes, they can cause damage, but it's not going to change the course of the war in Ukraine, okay? Right. And Tony Blinken, as Max Blumenthal calls him, Tony Blitzkrieg, he knows that, okay? Interestingly enough, George, providing long-range missiles to attack Russia from Ukraine means it has nothing to do with Ukraine. Interesting, as we've always said from the very beginning, okay? Right. So Yeah, an errant a drone being shot down over Sevastopol, or hitting an empty shack somewhere in the Moscow region. Of course, that is not something that is welcomed here, and a great cost and effort. I mean, I'd like to point out to people that I can't even rely on this 100% of the time, because the frequencies are being played with, because they're trying to foil drone attacks on the city that I live in. Okay, right. So when you order a taxi, the Uber, the equivalent here is Yandex. It even tells you, geolocation problems. Okay, and so your taxi is driving all over the place just because it's being interfered with. Okay. Which is it's annoying, and we all know what or why. But if you want to up the ante here, then I think that a public statement. We know where these missiles are being transferred across this border, from here to here. So heads up, those border crossings are going to be in danger. Okay, heads up, you've been warned of this. Okay, because this is intolerable. And not that no, we're not living in fear here. It's just that, well, we have the capacity to avoid this. I mean, that's the frustration. It's not the literal fear of the missiles. No, it's just that, why are we tolerating it to continue? That's the dilemma. And public opinion is very important here on this issue. Okay, people like to dismiss it. No, not at all. It is very important.
No, I couldn't agree more. And really, I mean, if you look at, well, what are the Western objectives? The Western objectives are to degrade, demoralize, drain Russia, try to kill as many Russians as possible, try to force the Russians to expend as much resources as possible, and also to diminish Russia's standing in the world. I mean, that so to teach Russia a lesson that you are not a great power. And what has happened since February 2022 is that the NATO powers, step by step, they say, well, we'll test it a little bit here, test it a little bit there. And they say, well, Russia hasn't responded. We thought Russia would respond. Well, Russia hasn't responded. Okay, well, let's do a little bit more. Oh, Russia hasn't responded. Well, let's do some more. And so he goes on. And then they basically say, well, that's because Russia's afraid of us. Well, if Russia's afraid of us, then let's do a little bit more. This is a very dangerous game, of course, that the West is playing. But it also comes about, I think, that Russia hasn't responded strongly enough at an earlier stage. Now, as you said, these missile attacks are a real problem, because you're getting attacked by Ukraine, which is a much smaller power, much weaker power. Now,
well, you're being attacked by NATO. Let's just say it.
That's it, exactly. But it's by NATO, and NATO is doing it with the impunity that comes with, hey, we're not a party to the conflict. It's nothing to do with us. It's Ukraine. I mean, all we're doing is, we're helping Ukraine, but hey, you can't attack us because we're just, we're just, bystanders. We're just, minding our own business. This is an intolerable situation. NATO is being thoroughly dishonest. And Russia cannot allow itself to be diminished in this way.
Well, I think there's some other tools in the toolbox, as it were. This is only my opinion and what I've been able to absorb talking with George, my program, and other people. It seems to me that American satellites are on the agenda. Okay, take a couple of them out and say, this is what's going to happen. Okay. Now, of course, there's the tit for tat. Oh, we'll take out yours too. Okay. Well, we'll see how far that goes. Okay. I strongly believe that the Russians prepared for this, and they have backup systems to be, as a preparation. That's only my opinion, not based on anything that anyone's told me. Okay. Right. Also, let's not forget, I mean, what Russia's agenda is here. These missiles is something we can all visualize, and you see a bridge on fire. We can visualize that, okay? But it's very difficult to really visualize what's going on the front, okay? Because the Ukrainians certainly don't want anybody to see it. I see it on Russian Telegram channels, but it's just micro stuff. I mean, what does it all mean? I don't know. I don't know, to be honest with you.
Right.
I see these horrific videos, and they should be censored, some of them, because they're just, you can't unsee them after you see them. I'm very careful when I look at them because it's just awful. But I have every reason to believe that the goals and objectives they've set for themselves are in play. The problem is that, you know, and George and I have hashed this over a number of times, that up until February of 2022, we thought of these huge, the Red Army, when it rolls, the earth trembles, okay? Like it did during the Second World War, okay? I mean, that was some, that's very different. The Russians taken a very, very different approach. And I think that's caught so many people off guard. How many troops were, what was it, 175, 180,000 initially thrown into this the special military operation? That's not very much.
No, it's not very much. So
not very much,
that's the point, that at all times, essentially, Ukraine has had the advantage in manpower. I mean, obviously, Russia's a much bigger country, but in terms of the battle zone, Ukraine has always had the advantage in manpower. Ukraine has always deployed much bigger armies than Russia has, and a lot of the fighting has been done by the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Militia, and by the Wagner group. So Russia has really provided this the backup. But you're absolutely right, because not just with the Red Army, but we saw in Hungary in '56, you know, in a way, it was a kind of a, you know, a reminder of the Red Army. They went in with all force and made clear that we mean business, and it was wrapped up in 2-3 days. You know, boom, that's it.
You could even apply it in a way to Georgia.
Yes.
You know, once Medvedev gave the word, the earth started trembling. I mean, and there was a major criticism by Westerners, which of course is in the mix all the time. You know, all it was just, you know, a steamroller effect. Now, I'm not a military expert. I'm not going to say that was true or not true, right. But, you know, once they put their mind to it, freed South Ossetia and went all the way down to Gori, and then called it a day and went home. Okay. And that was very quick, and it was, you know, very, very destructive, as I've told you before. One of the reasons why they went all the way to Gori was to destroy about $1 billion worth of NSA surveillance. Okay, which right. If you look at it in terms of investment, the Russians got their money's worth. Okay, right. But because the conflict is being fought in a very different way, I think that, you know, I think we should be a little bit more nuanced here. After the initial attack on the Kerch Bridge, that's when they took out all these substations, remember? I think that there's going to be another wave here. I've been watching these Telegram channels. They love to talk about missiles, and I don't know what they are. Okay, I don't know about you, but I've never really cracked a book and tried to figure out what these are. This is for military people. Right. I'm not a military person. Right. But I think with the you know, depending on what you want to listen to. And I warn people to be very, very careful about what, you know, military experts have to say, because for the last 30 years, Western military experts, except for, you know, we can, you know, destroy Libya in 10 days. We can destroy Belgrade in 78 days, you know. Right. Yeah, you can do that, but that's not military, okay? That's just crushing weak people, okay?
That's true, but I think on the other hand, in this case, when you look at, well, what were Russia's aims at the start, the aims were kind of nebulous. But when the aims are nebulous, then I think some overwhelming force would have actually done the job. In other words, you say, yeah, that's it. We made our voice heard, and that's all there is to it. You know, you're going to have to live with it, but now you know what our limits are, and don't try this again. And I think that would have been, you know, so, you know, leave aside all the, you know, demilitarization, denazification. You would have said, boom, you know, now you know how we feel, and then NATO would have backed off for a little while, and then they would have probably come back after some time. But nonetheless, it would have had that effect. What's going on now is that they feel, well, Russia just doesn't know what it's doing. And Russia is weak. It's not a great power, not really able to bring this war to a conclusion. Again, that you know, may well be wrong. I mean, that's the way they're thinking. Well, that's very dangerous, because they're going to keep pressing and they're going to keep pushing. And at some point, you'd have to think, they're going to come up against a very serious Russian response.
Exactly. I mean, I think you pointed it out a few weeks ago, which I think is very prescient to talk about, is that in retrospect, when we look at the course of the Second World War in Europe, we can say, well, the Battle of Stalin, oh no, in December of 1941, when the Soviets pushed the Germans back, that's a turning point. Okay. Right. And then Stalingrad, it's a turning point. Right. Okay. Midway, it's a turning. No, that's all in retrospect, everyone. It wasn't at the time. Okay, you could go well into 43. You could even make an argument into 1944. Okay, Absolutely. Okay. So I mean, it's very easy to jump the shark here. Again, it goes back to. I'm glad you mentioned the goals. The goals were nebulous enough where you could kind of. There's a lot of wiggle room in those two goals: denazification and demilitarization. Well, I think Scott Ritter was correct in saying that, in the first year, the Ukrainian army was essentially decimated. Now it's a NATO army with personnel from Ukraine. And the Russians have learned from that. Okay, they're learning all the time. Again, not being a military expert, many experts that I've talked to that I trust is that the Russians start slow, but they learn fast. Okay, and we've seen that since the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, so I think
that's always been the case.
That's a safe thing to say. Yeah. But it gets down to an issue that you and I have talked a lot about and even kind of argued about. Okay, is that if to achieve demilitarization and denazification, do they have to control the whole country? And I think that's a really open question, because my gut tells me, because of looking at the 8 years of the Donbass, is that the Russians are very, very hesitant to want to rule over people that don't want to be ruled. Okay, Ukraine, for lack of a better term, pure Ukrainian. Okay, the Galician type. Okay, I don't think they do. Okay, but there's a huge gray area between being very, very hesitant, careful, and going to the Polish border, and I think that is the kind of strategic dilemma that they're facing.
But I think that's absolutely right, which is why one has to assume, we don't know for sure because we haven't seen the papers and the parties haven't given interviews or anything. One has to assume that the goal was regime change, and that somebody in Kiev would emerge a kind of a Yanukovych figure, who would be a little more strong-minded than Yanukovych and basically hold the fort. He would have good relations with Russia. I think Russia would have settled to that, and maybe that was the plan. Maybe Medvedchuk was part of that plan, that he would be the kind of figure. But you're absolutely right. They don't want to rule over people who hate being ruled over by them. On the other hand, at this stage, I don't have much choice, because it's now much later in the day, and
well, they won't achieve either goal.
Right, exactly. So that's right. So at this stage, you just might as well go in and make clear that's it. We've made our statement clear to NATO and said this is it. We said we're not going to put up with any more NATO expansion. And this is where we are now. But at this stage, it's hard to know at what point. Now, I think when we talked about this recently, you said that there would be an offensive this winter, and that could happen. There may be Russia may well.
But we said that last winter.
We said that a year ago, exactly.
Let's be honest with everybody.
Exactly. Well, we don't know. I mean, but there could be an offensive now. That if that offensive is successful, that I think would put Russia in a strong position. But at this stage, for the NATO powers, they don't see any real incentive to offer Russia anything, any off ramp, as they say, and that's a good thing, because I think I think it would be a huge mistake if NATO were to go to the Russians and say, you know what, why don't we just sort of just freeze the conflict, just say, okay, everyone stays in place and we just take a breather for a couple of years. I think that would be the worst possible situation, because we know what NATO's like.
That would be a Russian. Yeah, that would be a Russian defeat.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think that it's a good thing that NATO, in a way, is as absolutely obdurate and fanatical as it is, because if they were smarter, I think that then they would make approaches to the Kremlin and say, why don't we just bring this to an end? And and the Russians, they might say, hey, maybe it's not a bad idea, the compromise and so on. That would be the worst possible.
Well, it would be the worst possible thing, because I think looking back, regime change was definitely there. It wasn't said specifically, but I think that's what denazification means. Well, they're slowly but surely doing it, but the NATO countries keep adding a technological layer.
They're going to keep doing that. They're just going to keep pouring.
Yeah, so they're adding technological layers on top of it. Okay, my question is, and it's something it's really hard to determine, because almost every single source has a bias on this particular question: is the state of civil society in Ukraine, its economy, its demographic situation is dire. You've seen the videos, I've seen the videos arresting, apprehending guys in bars and shops and on the street and stuff like that. If you had an ample number of young soldiers, you wouldn't be doing that, okay? Now, that you can make the counter argument and say, yeah, just that makes sure the rich kids don't go, okay? Right. The ones that are protected, okay, which there are plenty. But that's a variable I think we have to always put in there. And it's something that's not easy to know, okay? No. Now, I've come across some very interesting, like, I think the Gray Zone had an interesting article. It was like on labor rights, which, of course, that's their ideological agenda over there. Good for them, good for them. But it by accident, it was almost kind of incidental. They were giving all this economic information about Ukraine, which labor rights, I'm for workers, but I was looking at all of the other data the author was presenting, and I thought, I don't think you understand how interesting this data is about the state of the economy. So, because everybody wants to be the armchair general and the great, grand strategist and all that, but you need, the bricks and mortar on the ground, okay? And I think we have to keep a much closer look at that, because, depending on, the next waves of missile strikes, again, degrading the electricity grid, the water works and things like that, the bricks and mortar that you need to make a country run, okay? And then all of that NATO aid, really, it won't turn the corner on anything. And plus, that Economist interview that Zelensky did, which really weird, a lot of weird things coming out of Ukraine.
Right, but the other
hey, let me finish the point here. Is that essentially blackmailing the West. My people in your countries will not like you for what you're doing. I mean, that's I don't know. Is that planned? Is that off the cuff? Is that a sense of panic? I don't know where that came from, but that's kind of ominous.
But at the same time, we've had a number of times. I mean, I think when, and we've covered it here at the Gaggle, Zelensky has given weird interviews in the past. I remember we had one with the Washington Post. He gave also a kind of a very weird interview, also issuing threats. I mean, the guy, I think he is a junkie. I think he does drugs. And so he says, a lot of weird things. The problem with the infrastructure thing. Now, the infrastructure, I mean, the Americans are clearly going to pour money into the infrastructure of Ukraine, because all these big corporations, McKinsey and Sequoia Capital and the biggest hedge funds and equity firms, of course, they're not doing it out of a charity. It's not like coming out of their pockets, but they're going to get, the U.S. government is going to make good whatever loans they give to Ukraine. And so there's a lot of money to be had there. Again, it's a transfer of resources from the middle class into the uber rich, because they're going to make a lot of money, but it's coming out of American taxpayers' pockets.
There'll be plenty of markups.
Exactly, plenty of markups. I think that there is that. The manpower thing is indeed a question. I don't know how and that baffles me, the manpower thing. Now, of course, admittedly, every month, new people emerge in Ukraine who've just hit the age of 18, and so they're eligible for military service. So however many die, there's still new people who hit their 18th birthday. But at the same time, I'm puzzled, why they do this. I mean, if you're a parent and your son has just hit 18, you don't want him to be,
Well, I mean,
get killed on the front. You want him,
again,
you got to go study in Heidelberg.
no, you're absolutely right. But I mean, from reports I have come across, I mean, it's people live in a state of fear right now. Okay, I mean, Kolomoisky's in
Right.
shackles right now. I mean, wow, I guess nobody's untouchable if you're, and not in on the inside of the circle there. No, the authorities it's created a police state. I mean, they've created martial law, which allows the police, and then this ridiculous anti-corruption reform. No, they're the SBU. They'll be in charge of it. Great. Okay, they're great. I mean, that's adding to the problem here. Now, I living in a state of fear. I mean, if you don't have the means to get out, you're not out, okay? If you were a mother and father and, you got to get your son out, like even at, let's say 16, 17, get him across the border. They probably have already done that if they could do it, okay? Right. So, I don't think there's a whole lot of free will going on right now. So I think the societal issue is really, really important. It doesn't get the enough attention that it really deserves, because that can really tell us what kind of means they have, because in this kind of circling back, I mean, they're not concerned with the welfare of Ukraine whatsoever. No. Okay, no, like you said, like how can we go in there and get a non-competing government contract for $3 billion? That's what they're thinking about, and they'll get the money. Doesn't mean they have to do jack shit. Look what they did in Afghanistan. Right,
exactly. There's a lot of money splashing around, so it's not just the all the arms manufacturers, all the Raytheons and Boeings and everyone else who are getting absolutely fat from this war. But now you have all the contractors, we've got to rebuild Ukraine, enormous sums of money there. So that's another incentive for the Americans, particularly the Americans, because it's the American companies that are making a lot of money. The Americans are saying, we don't want to end this cash cow. We want this war to continue. But at the same time, I mean, I would have expected by now some movement within Ukraine just to say, that's it. We just can't go on doing this, because it's ultimately it's wasteful. We're losing lives of our young men. I mean, they're just getting killed for no reason. And that hasn't happened. And that doesn't. I mean, obviously there was coercion and everything else, but even so, even behind coercion, people can still rebel. It hasn't happened, and that is surprising. Again, if you go back to in Czechoslovakia, remember, they didn't resist the Red Army. Again, they thought this is nuts. This will be suicidal, and they just didn't resist. Even in Hungary, there was some resistance, but it was still limited. I mean, in other words, people made a rational decision. I think it is a rational decision not to throw your life away. But that hasn't happened, and that I mean, obviously, it's on NATO for acting in this irresponsible way. But it is extraordinary that that people are throwing their lives away by the tens of thousands.
Yeah, well, do they have a choice? That's my only question. I think it's indicative of the kind of rhetoric that comes out of the Kiev regime. I mean, the gross racism that they spout, this kind of megalomaniac perception of the world that is, it's this kind of cosmic. Ukrainians are the real Europeans, and the Russians are Asiatic barbarians. I mean, that is just the cheapest pulp fiction propaganda. I mean, doesn't aim to be sophisticated, does it?
No, okay? No. On the other hand, it's not too dissimilar from the rhetoric against the Russians that comes from much of Eastern Europe, with the exception of Hungary. I mean, Hungary is the only one that doesn't seem to have that kind of animus towards Russians, which again is surprising, because Hungarians, are not even a Slavic people, so they don't have any real bonds towards the Russians, but they don't have that extraordinary, what you just called, they call them savages, animals, and everything, which again, everyone's perfectly happy with this sort of rhetoric. And I don't know whether you saw, Peter, we got there's a new Finn chick, the new Prime Minister of Latvia, yet another hot babe. So it's like this is we got it seems to be the new prerequisite to be a prime minister, particularly in Eastern Europe. You got to look like a hot babe.
Yeah, it's the catwalk quotient. Okay, yeah. Again, you know, this to top off the societal thing. A lot of people that are being slaughtered are poor people. Let's keep that in mind as well. They don't have power, and I can remember during the 8 years after the coup, you know, in the middle of Ukraine. Okay, you still have these Azov type characters, you know, roaming the streets and keeping people in order and threatening them and things like that. Well, that's just exponentially grown. Okay, so there's a lot of societal control. As we mentioned on my program earlier, the kicker was, you know, we might have elections, but we need $5 billion for it. It's just like, wow, that's brazen. Okay, I mean, you know, the spigot is on full blast. You know, why don't you fill up another bucket for me, please?
Right, right. No, I mean, I think that, you know, when we look at it, and we can say, well, how long can this go on? Obviously, one of the factors will be, you know, how long can Ukraine maintain the manpower issue? But there's also the other factor is, does NATO get involved? I mean, more directly. And here we have issue of Poland. I mean, you know, the Russians claim the Poles are already fighting. I don't know whether it's are in Ukraine, whether they are or not, but nonetheless, that's a still possibility that they'll be, you know, they're going to find some mercenaries from somewhere to add to the fighting, or again, you know, there just may be some event. Now, you know, there's no question. I think the Russians are playing it cautiously. They want to avoid provoking you know, a direct NATO intervention, and that's could happen because, you know, the hysteria is so intense. We don't know, particularly when it comes to the Americans. Americans are very mercurial. You don't know how they're going to respond. So it's like the thing about the satellites. You know, I think it's quite likely that the Russians could hit American satellites. We don't know how the Americans would respond to that. I mean, I don't think you can predict. They might just say, "Hey, okay, cool it. Let's bring it to an end." But they might just all go crazy. You know, Sean Hannity on Fox, you know, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. That's it. We go to war. You know, we're off. You know, let's go fight the Russians. You can't tell. So it's understandable that the Russians want to play it cautiously. But I think again, there's a lot of things that could still happen, and a direct, you know, shooting war with NATO is, I think, still a distinct possibility.
Absolutely. I think the moment of truth, or the moment of the ultimate lie, is before us. I think this is an extremely dangerous time right now, because look, the West is telegraphing exactly what it wants to do and its goal. Okay, it's crystal clear. Okay, and even though there's no official state of war in a legal sense, it is war. And so you marshal all your resources. And I think that public opinion here, George, I think I've told you many times, people say, we can finish this thing off. Let's do it. Okay. That is a real issue here, okay? And we don't know the numbers of Russian soldiers that have died. Every once in a while, they'll give out something, okay? But it's not very specific, okay? I understand for issues of security and all that. I understand that, all right? But the fact, see, the West doesn't care anything about Ukraine, but Russians care about Russians, okay? And that's what's really important here. And considering that they had that partial mobilization, they've been able to, you know, I don't believe a word that comes from the Kiev government or from Jake Sullivan and all that, but they've taken a real beating with this counteroffensive. I mean, if a sliver of good news, everyone would be touting around. There's not even that. I mean, the one little village that used to house 43 people have been taken.
Right. No, I think so, and I think that, but that's really there's no question. Ukraine cannot win this war. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But that isn't really the way the Americans are fighting it. They're not fighting in order to get Ukraine to win this war. They just want to keep raising the costs for Russia. They just want to keep this going. And so that's why I think for Russia, once this counteroffensive is just wrapped up, I think that's the time for an offensive of their own, and then secure, whatever they need to secure, and then say that's it. We whatever it says, like Odessa, that's it. We're taking the Black Sea coast. I mean, because we just we just can't allow any of this any longer.
Look, the way I look at it, they have to take the entire Black Sea coast, because look, whatever is left of Ukraine here is going to be rabidly anti-Russian, and it will be well funded. Okay, they'll keep that well funded. All right, and so I think once the counteroffensive is spent itself, then it has to be Russia has to pursue its goals of demilitarizing it and putting so much stress on the Ukrainian economy that it will be cut off from the Black Sea, it will be cut off from international trade, and it's not, forget everybody. Again, it doesn't get as much coverage as it should. The Eastern European farmers have had it up to here. Okay, right, enough. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's right, and I think that. Given, I mean, NATO already has the Baltic, the Baltic Sea. Well, that's a NATO lake. Now, the Mediterranean, kind of pretty much NATO lake. I mean, it's controlled the Adriatic, NATO. You got to basically say the Black Sea, Russia has to be the dominant power in the Black Sea. That's why Crimea is not enough. I mean, you have to take the Ukraine's Black Sea coast. That this is the Black Sea. We're in control here, and I think that's essential. So whatever the problems, Baltic, Mediterranean, that's gone. Now there's obviously a conflict over the Arctic, but the Black Sea. This is in the heart of Russia's geostrategic interests.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that there's no doubt in my mind that that's what the objective is going to be. How the West is respond to it, we'll see. Like the problem that George and I have had all through this saga is that you're not dealing with rational people. That's what makes it really hard to understand, because rationally speaking, the Istanbul agreement, it was a good deal. And I'm sorry, I'll be really, I would, in my mind, I would have thought, no, I wouldn't, why settle when you don't have to, okay? But they probably would have settled it. With every indication they would have, okay? Yeah. Now, because of that, is that no, we don't settle until we get what we want. Okay, we're and this wearing down of Russia. Well, I live here, and it's not being worn down. Okay, Russia's international standing. Well, just see what happens at the General Assembly in a couple of weeks. Okay, I don't think we're going to see the kind of isolation the Americans want. Okay,
no, I don't think so. And I think
we see it with the BRICS, we see it with G20. Okay, so all the things they like to check, and when you accumulate it all together, I'm left, blasé. No, you're not getting what you want. Okay, Blinken lies through his teeth all the time. Russia lost. Russia's losing. Okay,
right. No, I think it's right, and I think that the point about wars, and I think it's the point that you're making, is that nobody's winning a war. You've either won the war, or you haven't won the war. I mean, there isn't really a kind of, well, you're winning, because again, at any time you can go in 1944 and say, well, yeah, Germany's winning the war. I mean, basically, it's still occupying the entire European continent. I mean, so
it's sending V missiles over London.
Exactly. So they're still winning. So yeah, I mean, you basically have to once you've won, then you've won, and said, okay, this was the decisive moment. The interesting thing about the UN General Assembly is that it's going to be a very underwhelming event, and that's I mean, the media already tried to spin it and say, oh, well, that just shows that Biden's elevated status, but Putin's not showing up, Xi's not showing up. And of course now Rishi Sunak isn't coming, Macron isn't coming. that doesn't look like a great, everyone's rallying around the
And
United
who
States.
wants to who wants to see Biden confuse Ukraine with Iraq? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, Zelensky will be there, but a lot of the world is already sick to death of Zelensky and the whole shtick with his wearing those fatigues as if he's some kind of a military figure or nonsense. So therefore, I don't think that anyone's going to be expecting anything at all at the UN General Assembly. I mean, if there was going to be any deal done, there would be, people will be showing up. They're not showing up. Xi didn't even show up for the G20.
Well, that may have more to do with India than anything else.
Maybe,
Okay.
yeah, that's a possibility, but it could also be that Xi is deciding he's going to think in terms of the BRICS. That's his focus of interest.
Well, I think the G20 is dead. I think it's completely useless. Okay, I think it should be folded. I don't see any. I mean, year after year after year, the G7 countries show up and want to dictate the agenda, and people are just sick and tired of it. Okay, that's why we have the G20s to have a little bit more global consensus. The G7 countries will never allow that to happen. They are the greediest bastards. Okay, they will look at every single forum to push their hegemonic view. And I think that the last G20 was just, who cares? Okay, it had its purpose in 2008 during the global financial crisis. Kudos to them, fine. But if it's just used as a political cudgel, then it's just like any other Western-dominated organization and useless. Okay, so I think it should be folded. You and I have our reservations, and we're skeptical of BRICS, but I'd put my money on BRICS over G20 any day.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that that's the big problem with the G20 is that you've got this block, the NATO, EU, G7 block, and they want to dictate everything. So right away, they get to call the shots, and other people are kind of getting sick of this. And so that's why I think you're absolutely right that, the G20 thing is like, why do we need this for? Right away, they want to issue a statement, their own interest, which is, Russia and Ukraine. And clearly there was no desire on the part of the rest. And that was a big failure. That was, the media kind of wanted to play it down. It was a big failure that the G7 couldn't get that into that G20 statement about Ukraine.
Yep. And it's a growing trend. It's a growing, and I think it creates a kind of a dynamic process in itself. Is that you can say no to the West. Okay, yeah, there are consequences. Empire is unforgiving. It's very vicious. It zero empathy. Has nothing to do with what's good and right and truth. No, has nothing to do with any of those. Actually, it has nothing to do with democracy as well. But it is a trend here. So I saw kind of our wrap up of our Sunday wrap up of Ukraine.
Yeah, but I think also when it comes to the war, I mean, they basically, I think that many of the countries of the G20 are saying that NATO is keeping this war going. I mean, I think that's a feeling that this is a war that should just be wrapped up. And NATO keeps this war going, and I think that's why there's a growing kind of distaste. And I don't think if they try another General Assembly resolution, I think it's going to be a dismal failure, which is why I don't think they're going to try any more General Assembly resolutions.
Yeah, because the global South wants to talk about debt. They want to talk about supply lines. They want to talk about food security. These are things they want to talk about because they're really important to them. Okay.
Right, exactly.
Zelensky and his clowns, they don't rate. Okay. And even, as George and I have discussed, on the margins of mainstream media, seeds of doubt are coming in. Okay. Even seeds of doubt about if Biden should, Ignatius, that's a flashpoint there, so the direction is not going in the exactly the same way the administration wants, but they will keep trying. Don't worry. All right, everybody. This is Peter and George. We are The Gaggle. We're on Locals, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. This is Sunday. George and I will reconvene tomorrow, and then he has his first live stream on Tuesday.
Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, and suggestions. I'm on the way out the door. think about little Buddy, because Buddy's saying, I'm off the General Assembly. I got to address the General Assembly. The tip jar situation is a global problem. And so, we don't want him sort of, getting on a plane and flying to New York. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip it out, dunk him in his tip jar. With any luck, we can keep him in Moscow for a little longer. We're very grateful for all
it's
of
very
you.
important Chihuahua security. Okay.
Chicago security, exactly. So we're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, we can keep Buddy a little while longer in Moscow. But who knows what happens next year. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.